Hello and welcome back to Active London 2021, of course, brought to you by London Sport. This next session is a very important one, and we're looking at how we can reconnect Londoners to leisure facilities. There are hundreds of leisure facilities in the capital. How are we able to make sure that as a Londoner, you feel connected, you feel able to access those facilities and do the things that make you feel good? And that's what's really important. So we've got a great panel to discuss that with you. That includes Duncan Wood-Allum from Sport, Leisure and Culture Consultancy. He'll be facilitating the session. He'll lead that. He'll be speaking to Stuart Makepeace from Sport England, Marianne Boyle from UK Active, Leete from the Local Government Association, Marg, Mayne from My Time Active. So it is a packed panel. Get your questions in. There is a Q&A box there, that function, that chat. Use it. Put your questions in there. Network. Connect with people that are there. This is all about us and about you, about London, and making sure that we can do the best we can to bring these Londoners to these facilities and make them feel like they have the access to that. Also, at the end of the session, there will be a box that pops up for feedback. We'd like your feedback, please. So be nice. Let us know what you're thinking. And I'm going to hand over now to Duncan.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session looking at the future of public sector leisure in London. I'm Duncan Wood-Allum. I'm going to be chairing today, and in the next hour we're going to explore the impact that the pandemic has had and how the sector is responding across the city. We're going to draw on the latest insight and learning from Sport England and UK Active, and we're also going to explore with our panel, our stellar cast, opportunities for further embedding activity in the everyday lives of Londoners through public leisure services. We're also going to explore what future skills are needed to support all Londoners in moving more often. And finally, we'll be learning from examples of best practice that have emerged from the pandemic with the help of our panel. So building on the themes of reconnect, rebuild and reactivate, I'm delighted to introduce our panel in a bit more detail, just so that when you're asking your questions, you can direct them to the right person later on in the session. So I'm delighted to introduce Marg Mayne, who's Chief Executive of My Time Active. Marg's been with My Time since 2014, and she believes that social progress should mean improved health and well-being, both for individuals and society, and she's passionate about making this a reality. Marg originally came from a finance background and holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Kent, and very impressively has represented Ireland in World Age Group Triathlon. So great to see you here, Marg. Marianne Boyle is Head of Partnerships and Strategic Lead for Infrastructure at UK Active. Before embarking on a role at UK Active, Marianne was Head of Sport and Strategy at the University of Greenwich and spent over 10 years on the coalface working in various positions within sport and physical activity within local government. So great to have you on board, Marianne. Now for the chaps. Chris Rushton is Chief Executive Officer of Active Tameside. He's an industry veteran. He's at the forefront of the pivot movement, which recognises the need to move away from mainstream leisure provision and towards the delivery of health and social outcomes. Chris's organisation, Active Tameside, has just been awarded the prestigious UK Active Diversity and Inclusion Award for the second consecutive year. So firstly, many congratulations, Chris, and secondly, great to have you on board. Now, poor Chris has got a cold, so we need to be gentle with him today, but thank you for sticking it out. Next up is Leete. Ian is Senior Advisor for Culture, Tourism and Sport at the Local Government Association. This is the membership body for councils in England and Wales. Ian's responsibilities include developing best practice, support programmes, media plans and advice for councils. And finally, Stuart Makepeace, Capital Investment Manager from Sport England, will just be joining us for the early part of this session. Stuart has previously worked with stakeholders across the capital as the facility lead for Sport England in London, and Stuart will be presenting a slot on moving communities a little bit later on. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We've got an amazing bunch of delegates that have joined us for this session, and really looking forward to getting going. So I'm going to ask Ian the first question. Ian, what has the pandemic taught us about public leisure services within London, and what needs to be done to ensure they remain sustainable moving forward?
Thanks, Duncan. So the first thing was really quite salutary, which was that no one nationally knows how leisure services are funded or delivered. So when we went to government to talk about what was needed to support the sector through the pandemic, through the lockdowns, it was really hard to explain to them what needed to be provided. And we saw a lot of providers fall in between gaps, in unable to access loans, not necessarily qualifying for some of the other grants available as well. So there was a huge disconnect between what was needed and what government understood could be done. And because of that, there's a lack of understanding at the policy level as to the contribution these services make. So the difference they make to people's lives on the ground, the opportunities they offer, particularly for those on lower incomes, perhaps out of work, veterans, all of the really positive activities that leisure provides, that's going unseen or has been going unseen at the national level. So really a need to address that. On the more positive side, because leisure providers have suffered such a challenging period financially, that's really pushed it up the council agenda. It's the first time it's been discussed so frequently and in such depth at the top table with chief executives and leaders. And that's led to a reaffirmation of council's contribution to this, why they're helping provide these services, these facilities to people. They're so important for communities, and this has just been a really valuable reminder for senior leaders that these are really important services. So that's been very useful. So what needs to be done? We've got to help government understand what this sector does and actually how they can best support it to achieve the outcomes that they've set, the vision for the nation, because there's so many contributions it makes towards obesity, levelling up, climate change. There's contributions there, so we need to help them understand that. We need to make more targeted outreach interventions. We need to link better with health systems so that evidence in terms of what we're delivering and the impact it makes has to be gathered. We need to refresh the public estates. At least 60% of our buildings are way past their either refurbishment or replacement date. So they're literally falling down in some places, and that's not sustainable. So we need an investment and a refresh of the estate, not like for like, because actually people's expectations have moved on since the 60s, particularly in terms of changing rooms, designing swimming pools, which can be much more efficient and effective. And lastly, I think we need to better reflect social value when we're commissioning and funding services. So the lockdown period has just revealed how many contracts were just on the financial knife edge. And actually that leads to a very fragile sector. And if we're going to ensure that there's resilience in it, that providers can continue to deliver, we need to actually reimburse them effectively for the social value that they bring.
Ian, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And just to let delegates know that Sport England will be releasing the new leisure services delivery guidance very shortly, which will hopefully support a lot of things that Ian's been talking about that sadly we're lacking when we learn from the pandemic. Chris, I'd like to bring you in next. From an active Tameside perspective, how do you think we should be responding to this?
Well, yeah, great to be here to give a sort of perspective from the frozen north. I can talk about active Tameside and I can talk about Greater Manchester. I think the latter is perhaps more important. But, you know, up here, the issues are the same as they are everywhere else. But I think it's widely acknowledged that the consequences of the pandemic in the northwest were greater than perhaps elsewhere. And that really is about the link between health inequalities and demography. I think the pandemic's also served to reinforce what we already knew, and that we really are a lifeline for large swathes of the population in terms of mental and physical health services. And that's particularly true of commissioned services in terms of adult care and social care for children, which actually increasingly makes up the best part of half of active Tameside's revenues. And that really is the essence of Pivot right there. As a sector, we were amongst the earliest to lock down, but we were empowered to unlock earlier than most. And I think that talks to the lobbying and PR efforts of many of the stakeholders attending today. So thank you for that. So we were allowed to unlock early, but in reopening our pools, for instance, we incurred huge trading losses, and they simply weren't covered by the LRF. And this talks to our moral compass, if you like, and the passion for what we do. But in reality, I think we were probably politically naive, and we made something of an assumptive close in terms of the ability of local authorities to support the huge losses that were being incurred. In terms of sustainability, I've got a very clear perspective. The pandemic exposed current procurement and outsourcing protocols to be a major part of the problem, as opposed to the answer, in that just about every winning bid involved huge levels of risk. And that was blown apart during the course of the pandemic. And sadly, the race to the bottom has already begun once again in earnest, and that needs to stop if the sector is to stop eating itself. Thanks, Duncan.
All the great work you not just do in London, but also across the country.
Sorry, Duncan.
Apologies. I was going to ask Marg to follow. Firstly, thank you very much for that, Chris. Sorry if I dropped out there, everybody. Just want to thank Chris for those really powerful messages, and then bring Marg in really to give us a perspective from my time, perspective from a London perspective, but also from the work that you're doing across the country.
Thanks, Duncan. Yeah, so My Time Active have one of our largest contracts we operate is in the London Borough of Bromley. And it was really just great to hear what Ian and Chris have been saying, in particular, Ian's perspective from that sort of broader local authority association. I guess from the perspective of a simple operator, if you like, I'd be saying the pandemic taught all of us as citizens just absolutely the importance of the value of public leisure. So whether that was, absolutely public health, I mean, with the Prime Minister for the first time saying exercise was important. I mean, this, the word exercise in everyone's mind, this is amazing. And everybody began to realise the importance of getting out and moving, particularly during those lockdown periods. So everybody realised that, there's a public health agenda that leisure can really respond to. It taught us that things like swimming were really essential, and how much people missed their swimming pools, especially kids. And, kids maybe having missed out on 12, 18, even up to 24 months of swimming lessons. So it taught us some core skills that are really important that we do. But also it taught us about community. In our area, one of the groups that came back the quickest was our over 60s group, right? We call them the prime timers. They loved their classes. This was an essential lifeline. This is what they did. This is their community. It was much more than being physically active. So at a whole range of levels, for every one of us as an individual or people who are also connected in sport professionally, we know, and it reinforced the importance of public leisure. So non-negotiable. However, I think, and this, to move to the sustainability question, and it's very much echoing what both Ian and Chris have said, which is that vital thing that we do in public leisure is not being valued. It's not being valued at policy level. It's not being recognised and valued at policy level. It's probably a bit tough to say it's not being recognised. It is being recognised, but nice words do not pay the bills. And like Chris, our organisation was very much at huge financial challenges. Our income dropped from £2.5 million a month to practically zero overnight, with a massive payroll behind that. So really extremely challenging questions. To be frank, looking at solvency issues, and that's what our board of trustees would be, very honest and say to that. And no matter what nice words are around the social benefit, we need some money behind that. And there is really no point I think there's a lot of capacity within the sector to deliver to the broader agenda, but we have to recognise that this doesn't come without some payment and without some cash behind it.
Thanks, Marg. I think it's stark that the financial pressure that the sector's been under has been articulated so well in terms of the potential of what we can do to help level up and help build back better and stronger. And in some ways, I think we've got to hold on to that opportunity moving forward and keep things as positive as we can. I think from what we've already heard, this highlights the need for real-time insight to support recovery. And so I'm delighted to invite Stuart from Sport England to briefly explain to us about moving communities and share some of the latest insights, trends and learning which will help everybody recover moving forward. So over to you, Stuart.
Great, thank you, Duncan, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can see the slides, see the information. Sport England recognises the vital role that gyms and leisure centres play in helping people to be active. That's why back in March 2021, we led the development of the Moving Communities service off the back of the National Leisure Recovery Fund. As Duncan says, the platform provides real-time data across a range of areas. So it provides information on who is using the facilities and when. It provides information on finance, looking at income and expenditure. It provides insight on customer experience. And also importantly, it provides an understanding of the social value of local leisure facilities to local communities. Moving Communities has two main aims. Firstly, to support local authorities, leisure providers and policymakers to support the recovery of public gyms and leisure centres from the pandemic by helping to understand their performance and how this compares to national, operational and nearest neighbour comparisons. It's also there to inform future investment decisions made locally and nationally to help to strengthen communities and to improve the nation's health and well-being. To date, Moving Communities has created a step change in data collection and analysis across public sector leisure provision. This is considered really important and gives the sector real insight when it needs it. To date, nearly 300 local authorities are registered on the service, with more than 1,200 sites covered. What I'll do now is take you through some of the key headlines from the platform, but I would encourage anyone who's not yet seen the platform or who would like to find out how to get any of their centres integrated onto the system to go onto the Moving Communities website and to sign up. So the live data that we've got on the Moving Communities platform is able to compare to historical data from 2019 to provide a pre and post COVID picture, leading to a better and an ongoing understanding of how the sector is recovering. So what is the data telling us? Looking at overall participation trends first, the data shows that participation rates increased quickly during the first 6 weeks since reopening, moving from circa 57% compared to 2019, the same week in 2019, up to a high of 77%. Since week 6, participation rates have varied, but are holding steady above or around the 70% figure compared to the same weeks in 2019. Key milestones such as the lifting of group exercise restrictions and the removal of all restrictions on Freedom Day both led to immediate increases in comparison with the previous weeks. The data shows that whilst the public leisure sector has shown a steady rate of recovery since the reopening in March, there are former participants still not choosing to return to leisure facilities. Whilst the mandatory capacity restrictions have been removed, there appear to be factors holding back the final tranche of customers and limiting overall recovery. It is important as a sector that we try and evaluate the potential reasons for the lack of continued growth. One factor suggested by the insight for the lack of continued growth is likely to be the ongoing presence of COVID and the effect that this has on consumer confidence in centres as the safest places for them to exercise, and therefore their willingness to return to leisure centres. Linked to this, recent data from Savanta Comres identified that 61% of respondents stated that they were worried about exercising close to other people, which was 4 percentage points higher than the previous set of results. Moving communities data can also be analysed by age, gender, deprivation and activity to get a more detailed understanding and comparison. This is a really important part of the platform as it helps the sector to understand who is and who isn't returning to the leisure centres and whether the services and facilities are meeting the needs of everyone. For example, data from the first 7 weeks post-reopening showed a strong return of participants from more deprived areas, leading to a more balanced distribution amongst deprivation groups. This is encouraging and, as touched on by other people on the panel, demonstrates the importance of public leisure provision to less well-off people within our communities. From a male-female perspective, whilst a greater proportion of participation comes from male participants since reopening, the balance is closer to 50-50 when compared to the same period in 2019. Moving communities is also able to collect financial data alongside the participation information. Analysis is being conducted to show, firstly, if there is a subsidy cost per visit, and secondly, the percentage cost recovery for the pre-COVID 19-20 financial year and the COVID impacted 20 to 21 financial year. The data indicates that in financial year 19-20, a trading surplus of 34p per visit was achieved. But in financial year 2021, with the impact of COVID, there was a subsidy of £6.65 per visit. From a cost recovery perspective, the data shows that the operating income was 12.2% higher than the operating expenditure in financial year 19-20. However, for financial year 2021, the income generated covered only 41% of the total expenditure. So as can be seen from this short presentation, Moving Communities has a wealth of real-time information that can help local authorities and operators to better understand who is using their leisure centres, how they are using them, and their financial performance. This can all help to support the recovery process and to inform any future investment decisions. Finally, just an encouragement to sign up to the Moving Communities platform. The link is on the slide. We can also put it in the chat function as well, but I hope you found that helpful. Thank you, and back to you, Duncan.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much for that, Stuart. I think we're going to put that link in the chat for people, and I would encourage anybody that's looking to track the performance of other service providers across the country to get involved, because certainly in terms of managing stakeholders, it's a great way to show that recovery is going to take a little bit of time if we look at that subsidy level at the moment of over £6. So what I'd like to do next is invite Marianne from UK Active. She's got feedback from the Future of Leisure consultation that UK Active have been undertaking recently, and wants to share some key insights and learning from recent member consultation on the future of leisure and also today's growth modelling announcement. So over to you, Marianne.
Well, thank you, Duncan. And I was going to say good morning, but we've crept into the afternoon. So good afternoon, everybody, from wherever you're zooming in from across London and potentially wider. I'd like to just quickly say thank you to London Sport for inviting me to join you all here today. And as Duncan said, what I want to do is just talk you through the journey that of our sector and ourselves at UK Active over the last year, bringing you right up to the most recent announcement, as Duncan said today, around our growth modelling work. Firstly, I think, Stuart's touched there on moving communities and the impact of COVID, duration during COVID, but also as we've emerged from it. I think I'd just like to take a little trip down memory lane and then kind of heady pre-COVID days, if you will. The leisure industry was booming. In fact, it was one of the fastest growing sectors within the UK. And for the first time in 3 years, data was showing signs of growth within the public sector. There was a real desire for the nation to live healthy, active lives, and we were seeing huge numbers participating in activity at our leisure centres. In 2019, memberships were over the 10 million mark, which is a 15.6% population penetration. And second only to walking, leisure facilities were the biggest driver of participation in physical activity in England. Enter 2020. What we've seen is COVID-19 accentuating the importance of community-based physical activity, but at the same time, it's really exposed the fragility of its infrastructure. And this fragility has emerged not just as a result of COVID, but primarily because the landscape in which public sector leisure operates has really shifted over the last decade or more. During that time, we've seen significant challenges that have really led to a diversification of public sector leisure delivery across the whole nation that's really created a misunderstood and in places a fragmented sector that lacks that unified purpose and vision that we really need. And that actually Ian alluded to in his opening. Owing to that severe financial pressure on local authorities, public sector leisure delivery has also become increasingly focused on driving that commercial income. And again, which has already been alluded to in terms of that race to the bottom culture. And that's really to the detriment of services that genuinely put customers, community and outcomes at the heart of their approach. In addition to that extreme financial instability that it's caused, the current pandemic has exacerbated and really highlighted these and more significant challenges that the sector has been contending with for some time, many of which were explored in much more detail through our member consultation on the future of leisure that we undertook this time last year. I won't talk now at length about our consultation because we haven't got a few hours to spare, but the full report is available for anyone that would like to view it on our website. Within that report, we do list 10 themes or macro level aspirations. And these aspirations were informed by our members and born out of the challenges that they face in the delivery of leisure services. And the themes that we really feel would contribute to the evolution of public sector leisure and enable it to become more sustainable and resilient. And we recently followed up our consultation, which, as I said, was done last year, with a more formal kind of thought leadership piece that we titled The Decade of Change for Public Sector Leisure, in which we at UK Active set out our vision that was informed by that consultation for change for public sector leisure over the next 10 years. What we're seeing across the system at the moment is a real positive gathering of momentum around the future of leisure. LGA, APSI and CLOA have recently published their report that explored that unique contribution of public leisure to getting the nation active and identified ways to enhance that contribution. And Sport England yesterday hosted the last of 3 workshops on the future of leisure with a really wide and diverse amount of stakeholders engaged. All of this work within the system provides a really strong foundation to be able to establish a longer term vision in transforming and raising the value of the sector and creating that much needed platform for growth and ultimately change. And what's also really important to note from all of this, because some people may think there's lots of different things coming out from different organisations, but we're not coming at this in silo. These system leaders have worked in collaboration and have undertaken this work to really ensure that every part of the public sector leisure ecosystem is represented and provided an opportunity to have their input so that we can then pull together the key themes and work collectively with a real genuine shared purpose. Running parallel to all of this work that's been going on, we UK Active have also continued to explore the role of our parts of the sector as we emerge from COVID. And yesterday, some of you may have seen the release of Savanta Comrades poll that we commissioned that showed that less than a third of UK adults say they are as physically fit as they would like to be following the COVID-19 pandemic. Real stark numbers, a third of UK adults. This really should act as a wake-up call if we are going to recover from this crisis. And we at UK Active believe that part of this solution is finding a way to fully harness arguably for the first time ever, the true power of sport and physical activity within our society. Our sector is already attracting millions to be active, but we believe that it can attract millions more. And in fact, our analysis projects that we can attract more than 5 million new people to using gyms, pools and leisure centres on a regular basis by 2030. And that's an uplift, so 5 million new people, not existing users. However, there's always a but. This growth really is dependent on two things, two very big things. Firstly, the pandemic really shone a light on the health inequalities that we have as a nation, inequalities that really run like fault lines through our communities. And the sector must continue its growth and development journey with programmes, services and facilities becoming more inclusive and diverse. This growth would be built around much of the work that is already happening and that we are undertaking in partnership with Sport England, and includes fully integrating with health pathways, new improved operating standards, digital offerings, and growing audiences amongst specific communities, particularly older customers and people with disabilities. We have all seen firsthand the evolution of our facilities and the fantastic breadth of services that are already provided within our leisure facilities and across our communities. And we know that there remains a huge untapped potential, as Marg has already alluded to in her opening, and a strong desire across the sector to really play a greater role in contributing to that overall collective wellness of the nation. The second part, and probably the most important part, is that the sector continues to grow its relationship with the government. As Ian said, there was confusion about what we are. We need to create a partnership that sees the government use the levers that it has at its disposal to really support the sector's development and enable more people to be active. In practice, this would include capital investment, reforms to tax and wider regulations that would help accelerate facility expansion and renewal, but also addressing financial barriers that really impact the delivery of leisure services, including VAT, procurement processes, and the role of leisure as part of the proposed health incentive scheme. We really firmly believe that the next decade provides an incredible opportunity for the sector to forge a new partnership with government, drive millions of more people to be active, and we and our members are committed to doing what we can to really try and make that a reality. I would just like to finish. So this morning, as part of the announcement on the growth modelling work that we've done, Tanny Gray-Thompson, our chair, put out a blog based on this. And I just want to use a little extract from her blog just to finish. And that's that I hope tomorrow on National Fitness Day that everyone, irrespective of age or background, will be encouraged to move and be active. Millions will be involved, and it will see thousands of facilities across the country welcoming people from their local communities. This moment really provides that perfect platform to begin this journey to 2030, firm in the belief that success will have a transformative impact on the health of the nation. I think that's my time up, Duncan, so I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marianne. I think one thing that struck me is the positivity from your session, and a lot of optimism in there as well, backed up with some exciting data. So thank you very, very much for that. As always, we're running a little bit late. So what I'm going to do is move us on, and we're going to have a panel discussion now. I'm going to see if we can squeeze in 3 questions to our panelists, which I hope will be of direct relevance to delegates at the conference today. So the first one is for Ian. Ian, is leisure still a key public sector priority in localities?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's certainly valued. It's important. I would slightly question whether it's ever been a key priority in its own right. It's discretionary service for starters. Councils don't have to provide it under law. So over the past decade, since 2010, we've lost 60% of budgets and 40% of staff. So we've really had to focus on those things that we're absolutely required to do. The pandemic has forced a reaffirmation and reevaluation of that. And I would say that leisure is very strongly seen as a way of delivering public health outcomes for communities. That's come through loud and clear. There's certainly been, over the past 5-6 years, a very significant trend towards that, and certainly there was recognition of it before, but perhaps not quite so clearly articulated. There's also recognition that it's got a major role to play in terms of tackling those inequalities across communities, particularly in areas outside of London, but also certainly within London. And while not a priority per se around leisure, if we're going to meet our climate change objectives, we have to tackle the leisure estate, because it can account for almost 40% of a council's direct carbon emissions. So actually, if we're looking to move towards an environmental sustainable world, we're going to have to tackle that. And of course, there's a role for ensuring that people are fit and confident enough that they can move to forms of active travel, because you're not going to get on a bike if you're not confident that you can ride it safely and effectively.
That's really, really helpful. I'm going to ask you one quick follow-up. In terms of budgets moving forward, what's the outlook?
Slightly bleak. Our survey of councils revealed that at least 1 in 3 is considering closure of leisure centres. That's partly pressure from budgets, partly because there was a big building spree in the 60s and they're simply past their lifespan, that they are literally falling down, as I mentioned earlier. So that is challenging. We're putting in quite a punchy bid to the spending review, but the government has had to find vast sums of money to get the economy, communities through the pandemic. So they are under pressure. It's going to be a very tight spending round. All I can say is that we're pushing as hard as we can at every door that we can possibly reach.
That's really helpful. Thanks ever so much, Ian. Chris, I'd like to ask you if you think that leisure operators have the right skills and understanding of wider systems working to support a pivot to well-being and engage more inactive residents.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. The answer is no. Pandemics exposed any number of knowledge gaps, I think, within the sector around how best and why to pivot to health and well-being services and commission services, for that matter. And that's recognised within Greater Manchester. And for that reason, GM Active has launched the Community Health Transformational Leadership Programme, which is congruent with both Sport England's Uniting the Movement strategy and the concept of whole system change, which is being driven hard by Hayley Lever up here in terms of a role with greater sport and GM moving. It's a program that's funded by the local delivery pilot, and any number of sector luminaries are involved, such as Andy King, currently chair of GM Active, and of course your good self, Duncan. I would commend it to the sector, and Andy and myself, and no doubt you, Duncan, would be happy to share details of the course, and indeed some of the fantastic feedback we're receiving from those who've already enrolled.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the plug. Not really necessary, but no, it's a great program, and it would be great to see more of that happening across the country and being accessible to Londoners as well. Marg, I'd like to come to you next, if that's okay. What examples of transformation and innovation as a result of the pandemic are we seeing that we can build on for public leisure sector recovery, possibly drawing on some of the things that you and your colleagues have been doing at My Time?
Sure. Well, I guess maybe a slightly different perspective from Chris on the skills. I appreciate there are gaps, absolutely no doubt, but there are a huge amount of skills and resources and expertise in the sector, and certainly that's writ large and across our organisation, about people who are literally very skilled in heart rehabilitation, cardiac rehabilitation, which we've got quite a substantial programme in, but also people who are skilled in community development work, engagement with disenfranchised communities or hard to reach communities. So I think while there are gaps, there is certainly a very, very strong platform to fill, to build on. And I guess that's really what we're doing in terms of innovation. So if you building and referencing some of the previous discussion where leisure operators have been completely squeezed, and certainly financially, we made a deficit of £4 million last year. We cannot survive doing that again this year. So our capacity to invest in innovation is extremely limited. So we have to build and nurture what we've got in line with the new environment. So our focus really has been around the health and wellbeing agenda. We've always seen our mission as being about improving the wellbeing of our local community. We see our mission as being much broader than just activity. We say be active, but eat well. Be positive, so positive self-esteem and good mental health, and also be together. Community and sociability is actually a key aspect for well-being. So we've always had that kind of breadth of mission, and we've really ramped up a number of things. So now every member that joins My Time Active on a direct debit subscription will be offered a health assessment up to NHS standards, well, slightly short of it because of taking blood and so on. But anyway, a health assessment very close to the NHS health check, a motivational interview, because this is all about behaviour change and lifestyle. It's not just about getting in and doing something once. It's about saying, why is it that you've come to the gym? You know, do you want to actually be able to kick a football around your back garden with your grandkid? Well, if so, that's a great motivation. Let's grab that and let's work out what you need to do in order to make that happen. So those motivational interviews become much more significant if you're really trying to get to the heart of somebody's wanting to change their lifestyle and really connecting in with that. But we're also launching a weight management program that's due to launch on the 1st of October. We're opening up our CCR program for exercise referral and GP referral program. We're opening that up to people who can self-fund and pay for that themselves. And as part of that, we're doing chronic pain management programs, and also a new program that's been supported and rolled out by Swim England that we're delivering called Water Wellbeing, that really fits into that group, where people who find it difficult to carry their own weight and support their own weight while doing physical activity can do it in the water in a much more gentle but nevertheless way that sort of still sufficiently demanding on their bodies to help improve their health and well-being. So a whole raft of things we're doing, none of which I would say are rocket science, lots of which are being done by other operators too, but it's about how we're building on those things and making sure we're lifting them up and making sure they're more available as much as we can to all our residents in the local community.
That's fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Marg, and really encouraging. And congratulations to you and your team for responding so positively, despite the fact that there was a huge financial challenge that you were having to grapple with at the same time. I'm conscious of time. I'd like now to move into the Q&A session. We've still got about 13 minutes to get some questions from the delegates, and thank you for starting to feed those through on Slido. I've got a follow-up question for Margaret that's come through. Is the data that Stuart presented in terms of the live data from moving communities a reflection of what's been experienced in Bromley?
Broadly, in terms of trends, yes, I would say that would be the case. Obviously, the exact numbers, I haven't got access to how Stuart's worked his algorithm out, and it's obviously generalisation. But certainly, we have moved from a position where the work that we were doing in Bromley generated a surplus, which allowed us then to pay, in effect, a rent or a management fee to the local authority. We moved massively into deficit. So that really reflects the slides he showed on the finances. The slides on the participation that he demonstrated was probably where, well, participation for us, participation doesn't mean income. It's a slightly different thing, and it's really important to recognise that. So our income, while participation might have been fairly consistent, the income definitely started low and has been improving. So we haven't seen the rapid return on income in line with the participation stats. It's been slower for us. That's for true. That's for true. So that would be the answer.
That's great. Thanks, Marg. Great to get a London perspective on that. We've had a question come through from other delegates, which asks, many sport clubs have developed a struggle to access facilities in leisure centres as spaces are being reallocated to manage social distancing, particularly for health and fitness activities. When do the panel feel we will be in a position to run normal activities in centres that go a long way to engaging different members of the community? I was just wondering who fancied taking that one from our panel. Any takers? Chris, over to you.
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, I can can reassure the questioner that certainly from our perspective in Tameside, we are essentially now operating normally. We've just lifted or are about to lift the last vestiges, if you like, of COVID secure protocols, which means that all of our spaces are available as they were originally, and they're not bookable with one or two exceptions on the back of our learning from the pandemic. It's interesting. You have to be able to reconcile availability of space with viability of space, if you like, and this sort of lag, Marg referred to it earlier on in terms of revenues. I mean, all of our indicators are very, very good at this point in time. I think we'll be at about 94% of commercial health and fitness revenue by the end of this month, and pretty close to 100% by Christmas. But what I fear, which compromises all of us, is pent-up pain. In terms of staff costs. We're lagging behind. We need to address that. That's going to cost a lot of money. And funnily enough, utility costs. Our contract expires in a couple of weeks, and we are very, very afraid as to what that will look like over the next week or two, whether we recover fully or otherwise. So yes, we're getting back to normal, but that doesn't mean we're any more viable. And it's worth bearing in mind, councils were struggling to afford management fees, if you like, which are a big thing up north before the pandemic. So even if we recovered fully, that doesn't mean it's affordable as it once was. And there really is real pain coming down the track in terms of the relationship between operators and their clients where they're not in-house.
Thanks, Chris. That's really, really helpful. Just looking at some of the questions that are being fed through from delegates, which is great. Neil's got a question. In terms of access, local communities have seen leisure prices increase in many centres to cover pandemic losses. With money already a key barrier to participation, what more can be done to make public leisure more financially accessible? I was just wondering if, Marg, you would be able to answer that one.
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, you just heard that basically the leisure operators, we're sort of at the end of the food chain in many ways. And well, we aren't. The consumers probably the end of the food chain, and then they're suffering any increase in prices. At My Time Active, we haven't increased our prices. We think that, we're taking the view that it's the most important thing is to build back the level of participation and build it back as being a social norm. This is what people do. This is what your neighbours do. This is what your family does. And so it becomes a really normal thing. And that's more important than the spot price for any one thing. So that's true. But like Chris, we also have to make, because COVID disrupted lots of established routines, we have to now think, and knowing what we know about how we re-establish new routines and new ways of being and new ways of scheduling, new ways of programming the swimming pool. So if you take something like a swimming pool, for example, it's accessibility is there's swimming lessons, which are in many ways the thing that keeps the swimming pool viable financially, because the swimming lessons are that kind of a product. But we know that Family Splash was completely sold out. The family sessions were absolutely critical for families to enjoy their wellbeing and to establish those social norms of wellbeing. And then I've just mentioned water wellbeing, which is a very specialist class for people who need to exercise in water because they can't do that level of movement in land. And then you've got swimming clubs, right, who are in there wanting, like 15 sessions a week because, they're powering up and down the pool at, 5 a.m. So there's a real, we've had to rethink a whole lot of the programming and the scheduling in order to balance that viability with accessibility. But prices to the consumer haven't gone up for My Time Active.
That's great. Thank you ever so much, Marg, for that. Had a really interesting question come through from David, and he asked, how can leisure operators and the voluntary and community sector work together better to broaden leisure centre usage by inactive people? Chris, would you be happy taking that one?
Yeah, no problem. It's a very good question, and self-evidently, the more we can democratize what we do in terms of volunteers, if you like, the more engaged the community is likely to be, and the more viable our services are likely to be. I can only talk specifically from an Active Tameside perspective. About a couple of years ago, and just before the start of the pandemic, we established the Sport and Physical Activity Network, which is quite literally designed to support clubs and by extension volunteers. We thought about constituting it, but it's not yet constituted. So it's fundamentally a part of what we do. It generates no money, but it supports clubs in bringing in funding and working on pathways in terms of volunteer development and so on and so forth. So in answer to your question, we have devoted resource. There are individuals within our business who are not commissioned, who are dedicating their time to supporting clubs, which are largely populated by volunteers, and it's working. We leveraged about £100,000 worth of funding into volunteer organisations and clubs during the course of the pandemic, which kept many of them afloat. And again, that's a big part of our pivot. So hopefully that's helpful.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Chris. Okay, we're coming to an end of the Q&A. I've got one really tricky question that I'd like to put to all of the panelists before we move to close. In one sentence, what is the one thing we need to tell government about the value of public sector leisure services to support greater investment? Can I go to you first, Marianne, and then I'll let the others think of their answers.
Thanks for that, Duncan. I suppose what I would say is I'd allude to what I talked about in my presentation, and again what we've put out there today in terms of that, the growth modelling, and that's gyms, pools and leisure centres that we genuinely believe they're the engine room of activity, and we know that they're at the heart of every community within the country. Within 20 minutes, at least within 20 minutes of every community, there's a gym, pool or leisure centre. They already contribute towards supporting millions of people to get and to stay active, supporting mental, physical and social and emotional well-being of communities up and down the country. So for us, it's just pushing that message that there's huge untapped potential. Look at what we've already done and we can achieve under the extreme challenges and pressures that the sector is under. With support, with the right level of support, and over the next decade, we really feel that we can provide a return on investment that government will put in terms of sport drinks and using the leverage that they've got by getting that 5 million more people regularly participating in physical activity through our facilities.
Smashing. Thanks very much, Marianne.
Sorry, longer than a sentence. Sorry about that.
It was several sentences, but it was definitely worth bending the rules for you on that occasion. Ian.
Thanks. So government likes things short and simple. So investing in leisure services will reduce the pressures on the NHS for a much lower cost than investing in the NHS. So leisure services is a solution here. And I'm just going to add a request for delegates. Please do write GMP to talk about the value of your services, because you can lobby councils. As I said, their budgets are limited. They need to be engaged. They need to know that they need to invest what limited funds they have in it. But it's got to come from the government. There's more investment in councils as well. Otherwise, we're going to see a continuing squeeze.
Thanks ever so much, Ian. I think the voice of experience there, and we should take heed. Marg.
So the one thing we all learned from COVID was prevention is better than cure. And it was a brutal prevention method, which was lockdown. So, but nevertheless, it was much better than cure. So the same goes really for leisure, which is leisure is all about prevention of lifestyle diseases, right? It's maintaining health, but it's prevention of early death and premature death. That is absolutely clear. And this is the moment not to underestimate the capacity of that local public leisure provision in the way that arguably the capacity of the local public health provision was underestimated and what it could do. Let's not underestimate it, let's build it, and let's really recreate it to make a big difference, long-term difference, to a generational difference as a result of COVID.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marg. And last but not least, Chris.
Yeah, it's what Marg said. It's what Ian said. It's a bit Bob Geldof. It's show me the money, because every quid you give us, we'll give you 4 back at a conservative estimate. So let's see it.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Frank, honest, gritty, but I think there's clearly a great opportunity for all of us involved in the wider sector moving forwards, particularly to support Londoners in getting back on their feet and keeping them well as we move into this post-COVID world. I just really want to wrap up with some key takeaways that have come from our stellar cast today. I think Ian put across the point that clearly we have not hammered home a simple enough message to government, who, to be fair to them, are dealing with an awful lot right now. And if you think the energy industry say that they've been ignored, the leisure industry is going to need to really sharpen its messaging to get through the other noise and to register with ministers and to get that support. There's a huge ask gone in for financial support, which local government will not be able to provide. So it's going to be down to central government to make the difference, along with us doing things differently, doing things better, and challenging the way that we've done things previously and looking to improve them. Chris has left us with a really strong message around the need for a new approach to partnership working between local authorities and their leisure operator partners, and focusing on meeting the needs of those people who would benefit from it the most. Marg, I think, has articulated brilliantly the value that our services, our public services, are placed by citizens, and that public leisure services are a key part of the prevention agenda moving forwards. I think that came through loud and clear, Marg, and I know that your team is doing a tremendous job in that area, and that prevention is the priority moving forwards. I think Marianne has given us some fantastic, optimistic insight that a third of our population want to get more active, want to get well, and therefore that will be a tremendous opportunity for all of you out there who are delivering services to Londoners across the city. So really from us, hopefully you found today useful. It is tough out there. We know a lot of you have had a horrific couple of years, and there's been some real heroics shown on the ground with communities, co-producing, co-designing solutions for people. Believe you me, there's an awful lot of people working very hard behind the scenes to try and position these much valued services at the heart of the recovery, of levelling up, and of building back stronger and building back better. So I'd just like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. I'd like to thank London Sport for allowing us the opportunity to share our varied views on the future. And thank you all for spending an hour with us, and we hope you found it really, really useful. So enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll all see you soon.
Thank you so much, Duncan. A really great panel. A really meaty panel. There was a lot to get into there. How are Londoners reconnecting with what we love? And of course, that is an active lifestyle. And also, how are we getting people to get up and move? The want is there, the intention is there. I guess it's about us to be able to join the dots. And I love Chris's little input there where he said, show me the money. Resource is what we need, isn't it? So let's put our heads together, let's collaborate, let's learn, let's share, and that's really important. So throughout the course of today, and of course tomorrow when you join us, that function, that Q&A box is all about your collaboration and sharing your ideas and your networks and putting your questions forward for our panelists. That was an amazing, amazing panel. Chris says, show me the money. How about we show you some lunch? Okay, Chipotle, our wonderful, wonderful sponsors, have been able to sort you out of a voucher. I hope you've used it. If not, then get out there and get yourself some grub. We're going to grab some food now, and we'll be back after lunchtime with plenty more here at the Active London Conference. I'll see you then.